Welcome everyone to the third in our MSH conversation series. Those of you who are joining us for the first time for this series, we had a conversation 2 months ago on what is Mormon thought, last month on what is Mormon literature. We've had a couple of technical difficulties around the recording for literature, audio only, and we're hoping to be able to share that for those that missed it soon, and we'll just use these same channels to try to let you know where to find that. We're also recording this evening's session for review, and we'll send around a link to the panelists and publish this on our Mormon Scholars for the Humanities channels as soon as it is ready for use. We've got a couple of upcoming conversations next month, I believe, in history, in August, law, and hopefully in September on music, and then we'll take a hiatus as we prepare for our annual conference post-pandemic in Oxford next March. The Mormon Scholars of the Humanities is a scholarly association started, I think it was about 12 years ago now at a meeting of the American Comparative Literature Association, where George Handley and a few of us who were in attendance at that conference got together and started thinking about just such an association. It has grown since and is one of my favorite conferences. My name is Jonathan Penny, and I'm president of the association. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on our websites. Website is mormonscholars.net. If you are interested in joining us, please send an email to president@mormonscholars.net, and we're happy to get you on the rolls. So now that I've said all that, I have lost track of my bio of Jennifer. Let me just bring it back up again. There we are. Our moderator for this evening is Jennifer Champoux, who spent much of her life in Virginia, but now lives in Colorado with her husband. She studied international politics at Brigham Young University and art history at Boston University. She's taught art history as an adjunct faculty at Northeastern University and at several colleges. Her scholarship on religious art has been published in BYU Studies and Dialogue, and she has an essay in the just-released anthology Blossom as the Cliff Rose, Mormon Legacies and the Beckoning Wild. She's currently co-editing a book on interpretations of Lehi's dream in scholarship and art. She's the former vice president of Mormon Scholars in the Humanities, and a very good one at that. Thank you for that. And a founding board member of Colorado Faith Forums. Jennifer.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to you and the rest of the MSH officers for organizing this great discussion series, and I'm pleased to be a part of this one on art. And it's so nice to see a lot of friends and fellow artists and scholars in the audience with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. And a big thank you, of course, to our 4 artists who I'm going to introduce here in just a minute. I'm going to also put in the chat some links to their websites if you'd like to go online and see more of their art or learn more about them. So that's in the chat. Just so you know, the format will be, we're going to have a discussion for a little bit. Feel free to type questions or comments in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. And hopefully we'll have some time to go back and address some of those questions with the artists. Okay, so let me introduce you to our panel. First, we have DC native and Virginia raised artist, Rose Datoc Dall. She's a Filipina-American contemporary figurative painter, known for her bold, unconventional colors, unique compositions, and linear graphic quality. While all of her figurative work is metaphorical and spiritual in a general way, her most iconic works are her devotional pieces on the life of the Savior. She is a 3-time Purchase Award winner of the International Art Competition held by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Several of her works are part of the permanent collection at the Church History Museum, Brigham Young University, and Southern Virginia University. Her work graces church buildings and meeting houses worldwide, church office buildings, church publications, books, and magazines. Rose earned her BFA in art history and fine art studio in 1990 from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. Rose and her husband, Tim, raised their 4 children in Virginia, but left their Virginia roots in 2019 and moved to Utah to live closer to their adult kids and 3 grandchildren. Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Thumbs up. Yeah, okay. All right, and then we have Anni Poon, who grew up in the woods of New Canaan, Connecticut. She is the middle child in a family of 11 and has a twin. Her biggest artistic influence was her mother, Barbara, who would take her out of elementary school to explore the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That's a really cool mom that you had there. Anni earned a BFA in drawing and painting from the School of Visual Arts in New York. She has created 40 short animations in addition to painting, prints, sculpture, and music. She has published several books, including most recently, Color Your Way Through the Doctrine and Covenants, a Come Follow Me companion, which I can recommend. My kids love it. And over the past decade, Anni has illustrated almost the entire standard works, chapter by chapter. Her work is also in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. And then Walter Rane was born and raised in Southern California. He received a BFA from Art Center College of Design in Los Angeles, graduating with great distinction. That was an actual great distinction in 1973. There he found the traditional approach to drawing and painting that he desired. That discipline, combined with an emphasis on the human figure, remains central to his art today. Following graduation from Art Center, he worked as a freelance illustrator for book and magazine publishers in the New York area for over 20 years. In the late 1990s, Walter was invited by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to paint scriptural themes. This opportunity sparked an interest that he had since childhood of creating spiritually based paintings in the classical tradition. These subjects continue to be an important part of his work today, along with still lifes, landscapes, cityscapes, and scenes of contemporary life, especially of his family. His work has been displayed in collections throughout the world. No matter what the subject is, he approaches his work with passion and with gratitude for the ability to express himself through the visual arts. Walter and his wife, Linda, currently live in New York City. They have 4 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. And finally, J. Kirk Richards was born in 1976 and raised in Provo, Utah, in the shadow of Brigham Young University. As a teen, his interest turned from music to visual arts. He earned a bachelor's degree in visual arts studio from BYU. He served in the Italy-Rome mission, inspired by the religious artwork of Italian artists, of Karl Bloch and of others. Kirk gravitated toward overtly religious themes, even as an art student. His career, spanning over 2 decades, has produced over 2,000 works of art. His work has been collected widely and licensed by faith groups of many denominations. Kirk has served on the boards of the Vision of the Arts Fund, the Mormon Arts Foundation, the Latter-day Saint Art Center Festival, and Listen, Learn, and Love. Kirk runs an art academy and owns JKR Gallery in Provo, a gallery featuring new work by living professional artists. Kirk and his wife, Amy, have 4 children. They live mostly on or in the mountainside town of Woodland Hills, Utah, with regular stints at their live-in studios in Redmond, Utah, and Bondville, Massachusetts. And just on a personal note, I want to say how much I have been moved by the artworks created by these 4 artists. They're each contributing to LDS visual culture in, I think, important and innovative ways. I happened to see Rose had an exhibit at the DC Temple Visitor Center a few years ago, and I just happened to see it when I was there. And I was really stunned by the bold visual effect of her paintings. And her paintings have a very emotional feel to them, and they just kind of envelop you. And I just wanted to sit and quietly think and look at her art for a long time. Anni, I've been working on a collaborative project with this year, and I'm really impressed with how eager she is to engage carefully and closely with other artists and scholars and church members. And she's thoughtful about her art and religion, and I always enjoy talking with her about Mormon art and experience. And I love that her style is kind of playful sometimes, but always with these deeper and sometimes darker themes, which creates a really interesting tension in her art. Walter, I remember the first time I saw your He Is Not Here painting. in 2004, and just really felt like I'd never seen anything like it. It really moved me, and I've loved all the art you've done. I've loved seeing the kind of transition in your art in recent years. I love the more dramatic and Baroque kind of emotional kind of pieces, almost more abstract kind of pieces that you've been doing. And then Kirk, I saw your Breath of Life painting at the BYU Museum of Art a few years ago, and it just left me speechless. Loved the just materiality of it, and the theology in it. And I also have noticed that I appreciate the work that you're doing to create a more inclusive Mormon arts community. So we have just a wonderful panel. I'm excited to hear from our four artists. Let me start it off with this question. Some Mormon art is clearly based on religious themes or scriptural scenes, but some is not so religious, so overtly religious, yet still imbued with an LDS theology or ideology. So how do we define Mormon art? Is it based on the subject matter? Is it based on the religious affiliation of the artist? Is it something else? Do you consider yourself a Mormon artist? And I know this is a question that has been discussed in other forums, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but given that our panel was given the title of What is Mormon Art, I wanted to at least throw the question out there to kick things off. And maybe a more productive way to think about this question is, what is it about Mormon art that distinguishes it from other kinds of religious art? So would someone want to jump in there first on this question?
I can, I guess.
Okay, Walter, thank you.
Well, I don't know that there's an answer. I mean, there are several ways you could define that question, and they would all be valid, and then we could go forth with a discussion of it. But I don't think there's one answer that would satisfy everyone. I know when I was growing up, it was pretty easy. You thought, what is Mormon art? Well, it's Harry Anderson and maybe Alfred Fairbanks and Arnold Freeberg. You know, it was a pretty small group, and I didn't think beyond that. But I think I've discovered recently a real hunger or energy behind the idea of broadening that. I know there are organizations that are just dedicated to broadening the definition of Mormon art. I just a few days ago went to a show that Glenn Nelson has been working on in a new gallery under the temple, and his purpose, I think, in having the gallery and in starting the organization that he did a few years ago was specifically that, to broaden the definition of Mormon art to include things that you would never have thought of before, you know, like conceptual art and multimedia art. So, I mean, I'm answering your question by saying I don't know that there's an answer that could really. I think all artists just hate categories. It's the writers, the critics, the scholars that need those categories so they can write about art. But I don't know any art. You know, I would be. It would be silly for me to say I'm not a Mormon artist, because I mean, I've painted the Book of Mormon, I've painted things that hang in Mormon churches. So, but I still never think of myself as a Mormon artist when I'm working, even if I'm like you said, everything I do is affected by my outlook on life, and that outlook is molded by my upbringing as an LDS person. I don't know if that helps or hurts or whatever. That's the way I feel.
Thank you, Walter. That's great. Annie, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on what is Mormon art?
Well, you know, the first thing that I noticed was that it was a question that really can't be answered, and that's what makes that question exciting, because I was thinking about you know, groups of artists who are interested in defining Mormon art by saying, you know, it's Mormon affiliated, it's Mormon curious, it's you know, anti-Mormon, but still making art, and people are, you know, trying to draw those people in. And I never thought that I could grow up to be a Mormon artist. I didn't know there was such a thing as, you know, these groups that we have now where we're on social media and we're making these connections, and I'm actually meeting Mormon artists mostly online. But as I thought about the question, I thought, well, I can't define what is Mormon art, but I can tell you what it does for me. It makes me, it's like the scripture in Alma, I guess it's 32. Anyway, it's the one about the seed. And for me, what Mormon art does is that it enlarges my understanding, and it feels like it enlarges my soul. And it just provides evidence that there is a common connection between the artists who are making it. It makes me feel like I'm a part of a group. It makes me feel like I can expose my innermost feelings and be accepted. And people understand the language that I'm using. Before I was creating, I guess, Mormon art, the movie The Split House that I made, I showed it to someone who was not a member, and she was maybe one of the first people I ever showed it to. And she said at the end of the movie, which ends basically with a temple reference, being in the temple, and she said, "This art makes no sense. There's no plot. There's no story. You know, it's not a good animation." But when I showed it, you know, at Written Vision Gallery, you know, people were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, this movie is about me." So that would be just the effect of it, is how I know that it's Mormon art.
That's wonderful. I love that description of what it does for you. And I like that idea of a shared language that we have through the art too. Kirk, do you want to jump in?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I just really agree with what Walter said, specifically about, like, I think a lot of artists feel like their job is more to eliminate boundaries and delineations rather than kind of build them. And so, and I've been trying to, when I knew that that was the main question, I apologize, I gave maybe you, Jenny, a hard time about the question, which was handed to you, but I've actually been stewing over it a long time, which means that I was wrong, that it was not something that we should gloss over. But I think it makes me want to psychoanalyze us, like, what is the need to define it? Why, you know, what is the purpose of defining it? And I think Walter made a good point that, you know, people who are writing, scholars who are discussing these things need to be able to discuss them in terms that are communicable, but it's not the artists typically that are embracing those terms.
Okay, great. And Rose, do you have thoughts on this question?
Well, I can only give you what Mormon art is in my mind. Well, first of all, not all Mormon artists create Mormon art. Some of the work that they create might not have anything to do with their ideology, or is not reflected in their work. But in my mind, Mormon art is ever-changing and evolving, if that might be a lame classification. But I think it's fair to say that Mormon art is created by those who identify themselves as Latter-day Saints, or that maybe, in my mind, it's maybe their Latter-day Saint beliefs are reflected in their work, whether obvious or not, whether symbolically, metaphorically, literally or subtly. And not all Mormon art is outwardly religious in appearance, but in my mind, Mormon art, there's usually some underlying belief system, whether it's portrayed or maybe it's something that the artist is struggling with this, and that's also portrayed. I don't know, it's super broad, but in my mind, I think that because the community of artists is growing, I don't necessarily want to put a definition on it, except for that broad grouping of having some shared belief system or some common vocabulary. We all have, as a Mormon culture, we understand the language of Mormonism, and that's something unique to ourselves, and that sometimes is a factor in the art, and that we can relate to some of these things that are so culturally specific to us and to our beliefs. Would I call myself a Mormon artist? You know, for the longest time, I kind of shied away from labeling myself as a Mormon artist. How about just an artist who paints religious paintings? But at the same time, as I have progressed in my career, whereas I formerly thought it was just really a narrow genre, and it was very regional and very specific, very just narrative, straight up, almost illustration. I didn't want to sort of be confined by this genre, but as time went on, as my work has evolved, I've decided to claim it and to sort of shape that definition for myself, and not let that confine me in a box, because my work is evolving. And again, I speak only for myself, and so I own that title now, and I'm not ashamed to own it. So
thanks for sharing that, Rose. As a sort of follow-up and maybe related question, in the previous MSH panel, they talked about Mormon literature, and some of the panelists were talking about a need to create a canon of Mormon literature. Mormon art is maybe a little bit different in that there is a sort of canon that has developed, I think, just by virtue of the images that have been picked for the church media catalog or church publications, the images that church members have seen over and over in the church. How do you think, how does having a kind of a correlated canon affect artistic production of new art, including styles and subjects?
Well, I think it affects it a lot, but I'm not sure who puts together that canon or catalog of artwork, but of course it includes a lot of non-Mormon artists. Carl Bloch, Harry, in fact, earlier it would have been dominated by Harry Anderson, Carl Bloch, Heinrich Hoffman, and I assume that the church as an institution, I don't know what committee or what group decided that those images were helpful in defining our beliefs and in classroom situations or missionary situations, and in describing scripture stories, etc., in a way that we were comfortable with as a church. So I mean that alone kind of redefines it, because we're not talking about Mormons creating art. We're talking about what art the leaders of the church want to use to define our beliefs. And at least in the past, they've gone all over the place. I think today there are a lot more people growing up with the idea of doing work for the church, and there's a lot of really high quality work and out there that has been done recently by LDS members. And so maybe we're not quite as dominated by non-Mormon artists, but even our logo with the Christus, that's not a Mormon artist, right? So I don't know, I guess I'm just muddying waters there, but.
Kate.
Kirk, did you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, was I unmuted? I was just
That's
trying
okay.
to turn down the TV show over there. Okay, so I will say something, which is, yeah, I think that a canon, for a lot of artists coming up, it makes them want to emulate those things that are in that canon. I always tell people to not make work for the canon, but to make work for God's children. And that was kind of my approach as a young artist. And I'm grateful that as the years progressed, there was some overlap, and that the church in some official ways has decided that some of my images were usable. But I also feel like if I had chased being in the canon as a young artist, that it would have stifled my development, and it would not have given me the voice that I have as an artist today. So that's the main thing I wanted to say about that.
Do you feel like as an artist, growing up with those images, do you feel like it is hard to break away from them if you feel in some way that they're authentic or have some sort of historical accuracy in them?
I think in order to make great art, we have to use our imagination, and we have to say something new with it. And so I'm grateful for those pieces that were so inspiring to me as a young artist, but I also realized that they were a particular viewpoint of, and from a particular era and by artists with a particular background, and that they're not the gospel truth. They're just like a type and a shadow of a gospel truth, and that we as artists can create additional types and shadows to help people maybe see see the gospel through a different lens or a different part of it. And I think that the more views that we have, the better in the long run.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Annie, you're an artist that has done some religious art that looks quite different from some of the things we've seen more historically in church publications. Can you talk at all about your thought process there, or how you think about your art in terms of church canon art?
When I first saw the question, I thought, okay, this question is kind of telling you the answer that would be expected, which is to say, oh, the canon is stifling us as artists. But I love those pictures in that gospel art kit. In fact, when I was on my mission in Croatia, I ordered one from the church, and I was so upset when it arrived at the church and the missionaries took it and they used it for everyone instead of me taking it and taking it home. I just love them so much. They don't stifle me. They give me an understanding of an image in my mind so that I at least can remember the stories, because I need an image. And then I use that as a jumping off point. And that's all it is. I work from my gut. I'm dealing with the same issues, I think. I'm dealing with the same stories, but I'm just doing it in my, fumbling way using my life experience in there as well. You know, I've had some really, I have dark times in my life, and for some reason, when I'm feeling the darkness coming in my spirit, I'm able to use the power of the darkness and of black, and I'm able to connect my strength to the strength of the church. I don't know if this makes sense. Nobody's ever been offended by one of my paintings not looking realistic enough. And I feel like there's so much room for interpretation. And I really don't think that it affects, you know, children negatively to see me depicting the deaths and the blood that really would have existed in the David and Goliath story, or, you know, Shiz being, having his head chopped off and ending up on the ground. These are just inspired by the canon, by the scriptures. I don't know why they come out looking so different.
Thanks, Annie. And Rose, I want to give you a chance here too, because I've been really inspired by the way you have reinterpreted some scripture scenes that you know that we've seen before, but you've shown them to me in a way I hadn't considered before. What are your thoughts on this topic?
So I'm just going to tell you what my observations have been. So this year, I'm on the panel of jurors for the International Art Competition, and from what I have observed, and just what I've observed over the past few years, being involved with LDS artists, is that I think having an official canon kind of can affect artists one of three ways. First, it can, artists who are of the classical tradition gravitate towards, you know, the more traditional interpretations, and keep that tradition going. Then there's sort of another branch of LDS artists who almost go out of their way to be different and are hungry and want to add their voice to this story of Mormon art. And they are coming out of the woodwork, emerging young artists, this new generation. And they really want to have a place and a voice, and it's inevitable. And then the third effect is that it would have no effect at all, and they'll just keep doing whatever they're doing. But so that's kind of what, at least I have observed over the past few years, what's been happening. So you kind of have like three camps, but really two camps of thought there. So that's my answer.
Okay, thanks.
I had one more thing that I wanted to say. I'm sorry, I forgot. I did want to say that there are a couple of images in that canon that are so just incredible that it's almost impossible for an artist who's seen them to depict them in a new way. And I've seen that with particularly, I guess in my work, the evil King Noah who's about to slay Abinadi. I mean, that image is so detailed and it has so many great stories going on around it that, you know, that's just one example of a picture that I just cannot think my way around to create in a different way. So I don't know if that stifles me, but, you know, there's also the picture of Samuel the Lamanite up on that wall. I've tried to draw Samuel the Lamanite in an original way and I cannot do it. These images really take charge sometimes.
And you're referring to the Arnold Freeberg paintings, yeah. I assume. Yeah. Great. Earlier, Walter was mentioning the great work being done at the Center for Latter-day Saint Art in New York by Richard Bushman and Glenn Nelson. And a year or two ago, Glenn asked some artists and scholars to create a list of what are the works of art of LDS art that everyone should know. And it was really interesting to see the commonalities, but also the differences in those lists that people came up with. And all four of you were actually among the artists asked to create a list of these artworks. So could you each tell us one artwork from your list that you, and tell us why you put it on your list of an artwork that everyone, an LDS artwork everyone should know. Rose, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, and I'm gonna put Kirk Richards on the spot, but if you could pull up the image baptism #2, and I don't know if you can share that on your screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the reason why I chose this image, it might have been my first introduction to Kirk's work. And I saw this at the international competition, I believe, oh man, I don't remember how many years ago it was, but it like floored me. It was like a physical force when I saw this painting. I just sat there and I just stared and stared and stared at it. And the reason why it moved me is because there was something so contemporary and fresh about this interpretation of the baptism of Jesus. I mean, look at his brushstrokes. He's so free with his brushstrokes, and they're so unique to him. And it was kind of a game changer piece. And I kind of mark this piece as the beginning of like contemporary art that would follow by other artists. And at least it is in my mind. This was kind of like one of those game changer pieces. And it's still probably my favorite piece done by Kirk. And he has gone on to influence so many other artists after him. And that is the reason why I chose this piece. Still one of my favorite pieces to this day.
Thank you, Rose. And thank you, Kirk. Kirk, do you want to go next?
I just want to say that is so generous. All I can see is the drawing problems in that painting, but I can also see how you have taken that idea and run with it way beyond where that painting is too. So that is just so amazing, Rose. Thank you. Yeah, I will go. We were going to do a couple. And one of the ones that I chose was the temple murals by, Minerva Teichert murals in the Manti Temple. And that has been, of course, the subject of a lot of effort lately to preserve. And I mean, I don't know if I need to really go into detail or explain why. For anybody that's been through the Manti Temple and seen those, there is just something that's transporting about it to our, back to our heritage, that experience of going through the Manti Temple, seeing the imagery that she sacrificed to bring forth, and also how it related to the frontier in those murals is just like this is where we came from, this is. And so that's why I feel like that's one of the pieces that everybody should know. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to know for a long time.
And did you say there was a second one you wanted to share, or just?
I'll just leave it at that. We can keep going.
Okay. Walter?
Oh. Yeah, I chose, and Jonathan was going to show it there, Forgotten Man by Maynard Dixon. And I just remember seeing that at a time, and I'm sure it was at BYU, because I think that's where the painting resides. And this was a long time ago. So I was probably just beginning my career as an illustrator, and maybe even before I started my career. And it just struck me that painting has stayed with me all these decades. I don't think I've seen the original again, but it just had such a powerful emotional effect on me. and also since I've been going to school to become a book and magazine illustrator, and that's what I've done. What struck me here was, yes, this is a figurative painting, but it goes, its power and its effect on me went way beyond any kind of narrative or illustrative effect. And so that's what stayed with me while I pursued figurative art, but tried to make it more than narrative illustration and make it emotional. I mean, that painting, I see the date down there, 1930 something, I think I can't see. That's not when I saw it, but it's been around a while, and I just picked it because I saw it so long ago, and I still can't get it out of my mind, and that's what I want to do.
Thank you, Walter. And then Annie, do you have one or two you want to share with us?
I'll share two because I tend not to say a lot about it. But the first one, the one that when I was asked, what is the piece that you think is important? This one just sprang to mind. It's called From the Dust. Is that right, Kirk? It's
Breath of Life.
Oh, Breath of Life, right. So can we put up the picture? Is there a picture, Jonathan?
Just a moment. I didn't realize you sent two, so give me just a minute to find your email, and I'll be right with you.
I think this is really interesting to see maybe how these pieces of art have influenced your own art. You can see those threads through it.
Okay, I can't guarantee it's going to be as large as the others. It looks like it's a smaller file, but we'll do our best.
Okay. So first of all,
let me just say, this does not do this painting justice, this image.
Isn't it circular? Is it me, or was it a circle?
There is a circle. There's a circle that is the trumpet shall sound. This piece is always rectangular, but they both kind of utilize elements and atmosphere.
The curve down at the bottom left, just, I don't even know where to begin with this painting. The thing that attracted me to it was the grittiness of the earth and the feeling of the burial of everyone on earth who will someday die, and just the grittiness and the feeling. It really touched me when you saw how clean and pure it is on the upper right. It felt like resurrection to me. And another thing that I loved about this painting, you notice Jesus Christ there, and obviously Heavenly Mother, and this whole search for Heavenly Mother that all of these women, including myself in the church, are on. Everyone depicts Christ, and in his own way, in their own way. Everyone, is trying to depict Heavenly Mother in a way. And, one time I prayed, I said, Heavenly Father, who is my Heavenly Mother? What picture represents her? How can I find her in art? And the way that she's placed here above Christ and levitating with this magical yellow paint around her, I feel like even though her face is obscured, she has such power and such grace in this image. Also, this image reminds me obviously of Michelangelo's, the spark of life, or whatever they call that. I felt like that was happening between Christ and the resurrectee. And I felt like Heavenly Mother was, could have been Eve tucked away in Jesus Christ's arm, like in that Michelangelo painting, but here she's not Eve, she's Heavenly Mother, and she's above all. And I just thought that was so incredible, and like I had found her. So I guess that's all. I probably won't talk about the other one.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Annie.
Jenny, I'm just going to pop up Minerva Teichert here all for reference while you continue talking.
Thank you. Okay. Kirk, did you want to say anything else about this now that we have an image up? Or?
I mean, with the image there, I mean, I talked about the frontier and the Christ figure being represented by an Indian, if I'm reading it right, or by a Native American, I think is kind of mind-blowing for a, white kid from Provo that was born in 1976, like me. But other than that, yeah, everything I said before applies, only now with a visual aid. Thank you for tracking that down.
So I did think that was interesting to think about how maybe those images were influential to your own art. Can you each talk a little more about what informs your art? Is it other art? Is it scripture? Is it literature, scholarship, or other sources? Does anyone want to jump in there?
Sure. I think all of the above in a way. Personal experiences, your art has to come from some sort of authentic place. And then scripture, of course, especially, painting New Testament images or Book of Mormon images. You have to rely on scripture, prayer, talks, definitely other masters, other artists, other influences. So I almost hit everything on that list that you said.
That's great. Annie, do you have any thoughts on what influences your art?
Before I was thinking of myself as a Mormon artist, I was in art school and I was looking at art history a lot, and I was going to the galleries a lot, and my art looked like the art of somebody who had been to galleries, but the influence was purely other artists and art history books. And my husband asked me in my senior year of college, he said, why don't you, your artwork is boring. There's no fun and joy in it. So why don't you look at something that you did when you did have a lot of joy, like when you were a kid? What is something that you used to do? Maybe you should do that. So I thought of the childhood games that I would play with my twin sister. We would use paper as our favorite toy. We would cut things out of paper. And so I just thought, well, I had so much fun as a kid making art. Why don't I just pick up those old techniques? And so I did. And my childhood was so idyllic, just playing with my family. And then as I became a teenager, I developed mental illness, and it was so horrible. And so even though my art is happy, that is where all that darkness comes from, and developing from one thing to the next. It forced my work to look the way that it did. But then, as I brought the scriptures into my work more, I found hope, and I found that there was a hand reaching down to me. And from that instance, I started to really find strength, the strength of the Lord through my trials. And so the scriptures did that for me. And so it's the scriptures and my own personal experiences that inform my work. I really cut the cord as soon as I graduated. I stopped thinking about other artists. I stopped going to galleries, if I'm going to be honest. And so it's basically navel gazing is what I've heard.
Thank you. Walter or Kirk, do you want to share anything, any of your influences?
Well, other artists are an influence on me. I mean, I go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York, you know, at least once a week when I'm here, and the only reason I go is to admire these great works, and they're bound to influence me. But I would have to say somehow everything informs my work. I mean, you know, at this point in my career, decades-long career, and doing lots of scripture-inspired paintings, I finally decided to do a crucifixion, and it was suggested to me, and you know, I kind of avoided it all these years, and finally decided to jump into it and do it. And it was really hard, and it took me a long time. And when I was done, I had to just look around and see something in front of me and paint a still life, you know, because and then go out into the city and paint a cityscape or something. So, you know, whatever, you know, a scripture would inform me, a bowl of apples might inform my work, a sunset, you know, over the rooftops of Harlem might inform my work. Whatever, you know, my family, my wife cooking dinner might inform my work, whatever. And it's hard to hard to say why or whatever, but so
Okay,
that's all I have to say.
that was great. Thank you. It's interesting to, because I'm not an artist, it's interesting for me to hear a little bit more about your thought process. Kirk, I want to give you a chance too, if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, just really briefly, I agree with everything that everybody else said. Scriptures, personal experience, what's happening in my life, all of those things, looking at art, looking at lots of art. The only thing I would add probably is figure drawing, which has kind of been the basis of my study for many years. And a lot of the compositions that I make just begin as imaginative figure drawings, or kind of just moving the pen on a paper until a figure appears, and then figuring out what that figure is saying and what's happening, building a story around it, and then building meaning on top of that story.
Great, thank you. Traditionally, Mormon art has been predominantly figurative and narrative. But there's been a shift in recent years towards more abstract or more symbolic types of religious art in the LDS Church. Can you share any of your thoughts about this shift or what you see happening there? Does anyone want to jump
Only
in?
that I think it's very hopeful and inspiring, because I have recently served in a YSA ward and gotten to know, of course, a YSA ward in New York, you're going to run into a lot of artists, and realize that this generation that's coming up really responds to something different. They don't respond to the narrative, realistic artwork that I grew up with. They really respond to the abstract things. And I think a spiritual, art is always, visual art is always, I think, expressing something that can't be verbalized or maybe even visualized. And so, or explained. And so the fact that, just that fact makes it more powerful in a spiritual sense. So I just see the young artists coming up that respond to less literal work in a spiritual way. And I find that very exciting and hopeful for the future, that we might see abstract or just other kinds of work, even in temples and in meeting houses, because it speaks to the membership. Maybe not the membership of my generation, but the membership of the church in generations that are coming up.
And I'd like to add something to that. I mean, it's happening right now in terms of, this shift. It's almost like inevitable because the church is growing. And I think that there are more artists, more LDS artists on this earth today than there have ever been. And it's growing. They're like coming out of the woodwork. And it's really exciting. I think we have a robust group of artists who are up and coming and who are skillful, and it's really exciting. And I too share Walter's hope that some of this might end up in temples, and I absolutely agree. This up and coming generation, they really do respond to, they need something new and relevant and fresh, and they want that in their art. And people want to hang religious art in their home, but they also want to hang something that they can relate to, and that's something that's relevant to them. And I applaud these up and coming artists trying new things and being true to themselves, and adding their voice to the story of Mormon art. I think it's exciting.
I don't want to dominate, but I do want to add something that what Rose said brought to mind, is that the church is global. And if you have a temple in Ghana or Singapore or wherever, the people who go to those temples are going to respond to something different than going to a temple in Utah. And hopefully that becomes a reality, that we don't just have the same artwork in a building here as one in Russia or wherever, that there's, I mean, those cultures have different ways of expressing their spirituality, and it should be part of the church too.
I think that's a really great point, Walter. Thank you for bringing that up. And I want to also point out, my friend Laura Howe rightly points out in the chat that actually most LDS art has been landscape painting. She's exactly right. And I should have distinguished what I meant when I was saying figurative painting was, in the past, 50, 60 years, that art has been used to illustrate scripture and history and doctrine as part of church education. It's been mostly figurative there. But did anyone else want to say anything on this question?
I guess I'm hoping that what you're saying is true. I am wondering if, like, I do see more abstraction in shows like the Center for, the Latter-day Saint Art Festival, and places like that, in terms of like official use and even really populist Mormon art. I don't see, maybe I just need to look more closely, but I don't know if I've seen abstract art make the same kind of progress that you are talking about. But I do hope that that happens, and maybe you're seeing something that I will soon see. I hope so. We're going to do one of our next shows at my gallery in Provo is abstract art, and it's something that I love personally, and I'd love for us as artists to be able to explore and to be supported in works that are less expected, less traditional from the standpoint of what we've done in the past. So
Yeah,
Well,
I think my comment was more hopeful than reality. So
I do know that they are trying to expand that, the church, the catalog for meeting houses. I know that they're expanding that as we speak, so I'm hopeful. But even artists like the artwork of Jorge Coco, that that definitely is not traditional. His work is cubist, his sacro-cubism. And so works like that do give me hope. But that isn't to say that Mormon artists aren't creating this work, because they are. I mean, they're all over Instagram. All the entries that have been that have flooded in with the international competition, there's such a diversity of art that has been entered, and to me that makes me really hopeful.
yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thanks, Rose.
I wonder, Kirk, what do you think might be at stake there of why abstract art maybe hasn't been as accepted in the official church channels? And I'm thinking maybe about like your Christos series, where you have, what was clearly an image of Christ, but without the facial features, a little more abstracted. And I'm wondering, is it issues of gaze, or issues of not being didactic enough, or is it that an image like that kind of thwarts our perception or our expectation of seeing a face there? And I don't know.
I think that most people don't study art long term, and they're just uncomfortable with abstraction. And which I think is a little bit ironic. Because I liken abstraction in visual arts to teaching in parables, like getting across a principle. I think that's what abstract art does, is it focuses on the principle rather than the details, rather than kind of defining something that almost probably isn't definable for us in our current, with seeing through a glass darkly as we do. In some ways, I think abstract art more fully represents our current state of the way that we're able to see the eternities. But I think that some people might be uncomfortable with that idea that we don't see everything in detail, even in the eternities. So that might be more of a philosophical answer than some people might give. Maybe it's just they prefer to see things that look real.
Speaking of that, are there ways that artists can find to illustrate more marginalized figures that or people that are even scripture characters that haven't been portrayed as much or as frequently?
I would like to say that I am illustrating a bunch of books right now, and one of them is the Old Testament coloring book for Come Follow Me. And having gotten a chance to see the curriculum early and going through it now for my work, I have noticed that the church is really making an effort to include those new stories that have not been, you know, as popular in the past or haven't even been known. I'm seeing stories of people in there that I never knew about, stories I never heard. And then they're taking, you know, stories like Abraham and Isaac, and they didn't even mention it in the next year's curriculum. They focus on, you know, Rebecca at the well, and they, Deborah, I think, leading the Nephite army, I mean, the Israelite armies. So I think that's very hopeful what they are doing. As far as, you know, encouraging marginalized figures, I think, I don't know who all is sitting in the audience here today, but I would say if you want to make your own, I would say, you know, if you're looking to depict something that people haven't depicted yet, just look inside, start keeping a journal, and, you know, respond when you're reading Come Follow Me. It always says, you know, write your response, record in your journal. So, you know, when I go through every day, you know, the different things will speak out to me, and there'll be things that I never thought about before. And there's a moment, you can take that moment and you can decide that this is something that you're going to depict. And it's very exciting. I don't feel like anyone is putting those types of stories down. I think we're all in this moment where we're actually looking into this and saying, wow, there's so much here that has yet to be touched.
Great. Anyone else have a thought there?
I think that Rose could speak to recent meetings that we've had about representation in art, and with I think particularly the idea of race in mind and depictions of Jesus and things like that. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Rose, but
Sure, I'll talk about it, but go ahead.
You.
Go ahead. Are you done? Or you
I'm
keep
done.
going? Oh, you're done? Well, I guess, yeah, I guess that's the segue right into my thought. When you had asked the question about marginalized figures, some months ago, we had a group Zoom chat where we talked about white Jesus, and this, as Kirk said, the subject of race came up. And there were many artists of color who were, who kind of spoke their mind. And I think that if I were to give advice to another artist about depicting marginalized characters or other characters of race, that first of all, you know, you have to do it with care and with extreme thoughtfulness and definite, you know, as much as you can from an authentic place. And maybe not to appropriate somebody else's culture and try and like project what you think they're saying or what you think they're thinking. And then also to avoid like the tokenism. And I think I had brought up one of the things that kind of has irked me in the past when you see, let's say, somebody representing, like there's the one token Asian person in this painting. And what I mean by token Asian person is that they'll probably pick somebody who looks Chinese to represent all Asian people. And there are 48 Asian countries on this planet, and to just pick one is sort of just like, it's sort of a perfunctory representation, and that's definitely something that that you'd want to avoid. And so representing other people, other races, it's been interesting because the theme for the church art competition this year is all are alike unto God. And it's been extremely refreshing to see this, these very thoughtful representations of inclusion and love for other human beings, and like I said, extreme thoughtfulness. And so that is kind of, I guess where I'm going with this is that to be mindful of and do your homework, do your research, really get under, make this as much part of your story, because you don't want to borrow somebody else's story. You want to somehow have some sort of commentary about it. And maybe that's the connection, is that's your commentary. You might not be a Black person, but you can certainly, as a white person, have solidarity, and maybe that can be part of your commentary, and your empathy can be a huge factor in that.
Thank you, Rose. Annie?
Well, I'll just mention that I did enter the competition, and it was a really hard question for me, because like Rose said, I didn't want to just start depicting, people of other races for some kind of a gimmick. So what happened was I had been creating these artworks about, Jesus Christ gathering the children. I've done a lot of pictures like that. And I had one that I had done of, it was multiracial, and I didn't just want to put it into the competition and say, here's people of other races. As I was writing out my entry, I just could only think of living here in New York City, riding on the subway. And one time someone mentioned to me that there's no longer a majority of whites that lives in New York City. Whites are a minority, just like everybody else. And I just wrote about the experience that I have sitting on the subway, looking around, and truly a cornucopia of races. And I don't feel like I'm dominating in any way. I feel like I'm a wonderful part of this community. And I felt like because of that, I felt comfortable entering this piece into the competition. And I can't remember what the question was, but that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's anything else, I want to move on to some questions from our chat. Am I cutting anyone off? Okay. So two kind of related questions coming from Grant and Lily. They both wanted to talk more about the canon of art from the church, and what would you change about the sort of official art canon? What do you see are the limitations in the art that's in there? What do you think is missing from the art that we see put out by the church typically?
Well, I still have the question that we could call it the canon of art, but for the church, but it's really not chosen for its artistic merits. It's chosen as visual aids for classrooms and missionaries. And so I agree there's some wonderful artwork in there that has inspired me, but I don't think its existence has anything to do with the church trying to create a Mormon art. I don't,
Yeah, I think
it's good that we've been talking about doing marginal characters so that maybe they're from the scriptures, there'll be more variety in those representations in that the church approves of and encourages us to use. But I still don't see that as really having anything to do with defining what Mormon art is. I mean, I guess in reality it does, but I'm saying I wish it didn't, because I don't think it should. It's done for a different purpose.
Can I just say something really quick, which I agree with what you're saying, Walter, and I also think that there are people working to accomplish both of those things simultaneously, like, you know, Laura Howe, who's present, like people who are doing the church competition. I think those are things like the church competition are both meant to build Mormon art as well as provide possible great new pictures to teach the gospel in correlated materials. And so, but I agree that they don't have the same purpose, but I do think there are people that are working to accomplish both of those purposes with their efforts.
Thank you. There were several questions for Kirk. So we put you on the spot here. They say, Rose talked about your baptism painting. One of your more recent paintings depicting baptism seems so different, even more cutting edge. They posted a link here in the chat. Can you speak to how you were able to continue to reimagine types of scenes you have painted throughout your career? And what are you trying to accomplish as you continue to reimagine your work?
Yeah, the piece that you posted the link to is a different story, first of all. So it's not Jesus being baptized in the River Jordan. This is more at the waters of Mormon, the church being established and the baptisms happening there in the Book of Mormon. These paintings from the Book of Mormon that I've been doing recently, have actually been painting through a stone in a hat as kind of a performance, but also to force an abstraction that didn't exist in previous paintings, perhaps. So, I mean, that's the short answer, is I'm just trying to accomplish something very different in that painting than the other baptism paintings. And every time I do a new project, it's trying to accomplish something specific. And so it often yields a different result.
Great. And they also ask about your Friends at Church piece. And there's also a link there if anyone wants to look at that. Probably already seen it going around. It's they ask, is this piece meant to be religious or devotional? Is it meant to record a social history we're currently dealing with?
It is, I don't know, you know, I don't think I need to narrowly define what its purpose is. I don't ever see it as being in an official canon anywhere in the church, but I think maybe there is an unofficial canon that is simply images that make their way through the Latter-day Saint populace and for specific reasons. And the reasons that it's making its way through the populace are perhaps the reasons why I painted it, which are, you know, hopeful feelings of hope on my end for continued revelation.
Great. Teresa asked, and this maybe is a question for any of you, how can we get more comfortable with abstract art if we feel like it's not something we're seeing really embraced by church members or in the, you know, church catalog? Are there ways we could get more comfortable with it?
I am not a person who's seen a lot of LDS abstract art, but I know I've been acclimated to it by seeing the work of two women, Lisa Valkyrie, I think is her name. Her work, she uses sacred abstraction. Is that what it's called? Sacred geometry. And when I look at her work, you know, she's making it with compasses and, you know, these different tools to create these overlapping circles and patterns. And also Paige Crosland Anderson does the same. And I mean, I had never really seen a lot of LDS abstract art, but the fact that they're still striving for order in their pieces, it's because as a people, we seek order, we seek direction. And so seeing these geometric, abstract paintings has really delighted me. So yeah, I want to see more of it. If anyone has like a website where it's all displayed, send me the link.
I'd like to add a comment there, or to answer that question, because I actually have been seeing an emergence of more abstract art made by Latter-day Saint artists. And I think the more that we learn about the artist and their intent, more than likely we'll go, oh, okay, I get it. And especially when artists take the time on social media. So if you're an artist and you're listening to this, we love it when you tell us the story behind your painting, the progress, why you're painting it. We love it when you tell us this, because then it becomes relatable, and that's one of the bridges to just understanding, becoming more comfortable, is to find out more about the artist's intent. So please tell us your stories if you're painting them, why you're doing it.
Well, the reason we're doing it usually is to open up people's minds to their own imagination. And I mean, my work is pretty accessible, easy to see what's going on in it. But I'm always hopeful that somebody's going to see in it something very different from what I intended. And so I always try to make it somewhat ambiguous. And I hate to, draw a line around my work and say, this is what it's about, because I want people to think it's about something else sometimes.
This might not be a good approach for everybody, but one thing you could do to get more comfortable with abstract art or to appreciate it more is to try to make one. I hear people say that would be so easy to make in museums, but the truth is abstraction is quite difficult for most people. So that might be more about appreciation and less about comfort. I think becoming more comfortable with abstract art is another approach might be to expose yourself to it in a museum. Go and look at some abstract art and say, what is this saying to me? What are the cues that, how does it make me feel? What are, how is the artist applying paint? Just, to analyze instead of, I think that typically when people analyze art without having studied it much, which I think is the case for many members of the church, would be just to say, how realistic is it? Is the artist skilled? If the artist has skill, then it will be very realistic. So I think maybe another first step might be just to dissociate those two things, skill and realism.
Kirk, I think that's such an interesting point, and it reminds me of, you always hear people saying, "Where's our Mormon Michelangelo?" And is that what we want? Like, do we want? I mean, because maybe with Michelangelo, you think about the formal qualities, and is that what we want out of our art, our religious art? Is it about the formal qualities, the aesthetics, or is maybe what's more important the way that it mediates your experience with the divine, or like you were saying, can be transporting or transcendent, and it doesn't always have to have a certain type of formal quality to have that transcendent effect. Okay, there's a question from Jonathan in the chat, and wondering about, Kirk, your painting of Eve and how that might fit into our discussion of diversity. I don't know if you or Rose want to tackle that at all.
Well, Rose was talking about how to do it right. And so I don't feel a need to provide a bad example to everybody. But I would say that in my own experiences in trying to paint the creation story in ways that are less white, I've done some things that some people were happy about and some people weren't happy about. But I've been so pleased to see since then so many diverse representations in the Latter-day Saint art community. And I think it's beautiful. I'm actually hoping that we'll be able to publish some of my images with the work of some other great LDS artists of color. I'm working on that project, but I don't know when or where that will be completed, but I still have hopes for that.
Great. Trenton Olson in the chat is asking, we were talking about your paintings by LDS artists that have been influential to you. Is there an artwork by a non-LDS artist that has been influential to you?
Is this a question to everyone?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, just one second. So this picture, it's an outfit actually. It's by Ray Kawakubo, who did Comme des Garçons. She was their designer, and I just love the strength of this outfit. It's and the photograph, the postcard itself. It's, I guess, seeing how unafraid she was with her work, seeing how playful she was with her work. Every piece in the Met exhibit was completely different. And, you know, when they interviewed her for the book, they asked her about why she creates these pieces. And she said, I'm angry and I'm expressing my anger. And, you know, you look at the show and you're thinking, how could anger motivate an artist? But I'm so happy to see, I'm just so happy to see how inspiring work can be, even from someone who obviously is mentally struggling the way she was when you read her biography. So this piece just speaks to me. I only have one, but that's it. Sorry, guys.
I have, I'll just name 3 artists. I won't pull their work up, but probably one of the first influences on me was Edgar Degas. And I can't choose any one painting, but it's mostly his later work. And then there's Mucha's Slav epic, which is monumental. I want to go see that body of work on my bucket list before I die. And then Wayne Thiebaud, his cakes. If you're familiar with him, he's still alive. He's like in his 90s, maybe he's 100. In San Francisco, his use of color has influenced me quite a bit. His application of paint, his whole color sensibility just blows me away. So yeah, those are my 3 artists that I would mention.
Well, there are so many. I mean, that's why I go to the museum to see so many different artists. I could pick somebody different every minute. What popped into my mind immediately was a painting by Cy Twombly at the Met that I guess, I don't even know the title of it, but I'll sit in front of it for what seems like a really long time, probably not that long, but, and just, it's just drips and smears, and maybe the subject of the painting is paint. I don't know, but, and I have no idea why I love the painting so much, but I do, and I keep going back to it and looking at it because it's just so beautiful. And I don't know. So, I mean, that might be a strange answer, but that's it.
Yeah, there's so many artists. I'll just mention one, and now I would just mind blanked. His name is not Kiefer Sutherland, Anselm Kiefer. Anselm Kiefer's work, I've just become such a fan that I can almost remember his name. But he has up here in Massachusetts at Mass MoCA, there's a building dedicated to his work. He also has some brilliant pieces in major museums, but one that I really love is Chris Baird introduced to me down in the Fort Worth Modern. But there's this real spirituality to it that moves me. Anselm Kiefer.
Jonathan, do we have time for one more question, or are we at time? All right. Martha Peterson asked if anyone has thoughts on the depiction of the cross in LDS art.
I do have a thought on that. I don't know who made this decision long ago, but in my work with the church, well, with one of their publishers, I went to put a crucifix in one of my drawings, and they came back to me and they said, "I'm sorry, you can't put a crucifix in this book because we just traditionally, as a church, don't encourage focusing on that." And I thought that was a little odd, and I started looking out for it. And it's true, you know, when I went to put a crucifix in a video that I made it with the crucifix because I wanted it to be a video that crossed different religious boundaries. And I believe that because that was there, the piece maybe wasn't accepted as well as it should have been or could have been. I just wonder what people thought, and I've come up against this a couple times. You know, how do I celebrate the life and struggles and death of Christ without the crucifix? And it's just an open question, I guess.
I use the cross a lot as a compositional device, and just hope that in the back of my mind it communicates something. But yeah, like I said, I just recently finished the first time I ever painted a crucifixion. I don't know what kind of reception it will get, but the cross itself, I use quite a lot, just in the way I compose a painting.
I don't know about the history of our not wanting to depict or use the cross, other than it feels to me like it's kind of an anti-Catholic sentiment from earlier years of the church. I get that we want to focus on the living Christ, but also I think we have a tendency to want to focus on the resolved and not the pain and the lived experience leading up to a resolution. And I think that actually our artwork would be better off, and as a people we would bring about better artwork if we were less afraid of the complete drama, and instead of only embracing the resolution. And so I love the cross. I can't get enough of the cross.
you know, and I agree with Kirk. I mean, how can you paint a crucifixion without a cross? And how do you tell the story of the Passion of Christ without the crucifixion story? And so I don't have a problem with including it in my art, but it is true that it doesn't rear its head very often in LDS art because of what we're told culturally, and as Kirk said, maybe to distinguish ourselves and our art, to be more hopeful, to focus on the resurrection. But that certainly is true. But personally, as an artist, I don't have a problem using a cross in my art. I have yet to do a crucifixion, so I'm kind of like Walter. I'm gearing myself, you know, up to that. That is such a heavy duty subject matter that I know that I only want to come at it when I'm fully prepared spiritually to do that. But I definitely plan to do one in the future because I am determined to keep painting the life of Christ throughout the rest of my life. But personally, I don't have a problem using the cross in my artwork.
Thanks. I know we're at time, but I just have one last thing I want to ask, which just quickly, if you had any advice for aspiring young artists, what would you tell them? And Kirk, maybe you'd also want to share some information on your Vision of the Arts Fund or other advice you might have for aspiring young artists.
I mean, you've just got to keep a sketchbook. You don't, who knows what you're going to do with it? You might rip up the pages and tape them back in. You might paste photographs. You might, you know, write lyrics to a song that you like. But I think if you just keep that companion with you, you'll learn so much about yourself. And all of us are different from one moment to the next. And I think just noticing who you are, what makes you different, why you're making what you're making. Well, you might not even know why. You might never know why. But the sketchbook has got to be in your bag.
And I shouldn't have qualified it as young aspiring artists of any age.
My advice to artists is to be true to yourself and be true to you and true to your story, and paint from an authentic place. Absolutely learn from everybody that's gone before. You've inherited so much from so many other artists that have gone before you, and take bits and pieces from them that are meaningful to you. But at the end of the day, you've got to sort of inculcate that and then filter it and then speak your own voice. So be true to yourself. Don't, at the end of the day, don't feel like you have to paint like somebody else. You got to paint like you, or sculpt, or create, whatever your medium is. That's my advice.
Walter, and then we'll end with
Yeah,
Kirk.
okay. Yeah, I guess when people see my work, they figure that I did it with the church in mind, which is really not true. I really, my subject matter is really what I love to do. And that's, I'm just repeating what everyone else has said or is going to say. I think that you paint what moves you, and do it in a way that is completely, as much as you can, yourself, and don't do it with the mindset that, oh, I wonder if the church will like this, because we all want the church to grow, and the only way it's going to grow is if the individual members allow themselves to grow, and that's what will move the church to be more expansive about its appreciation of art, is if the members appreciate, wider art. So
Yeah, I completely agree with what's been said. So I'll just skip to what you mentioned, Jenny, the vision of the arts. That's one of several opportunities for Latter-day Saint artists that have come recently. Specifically, what we do with the vision of the arts is an annual scholarship for those who are wanting to increase their study, especially those who are interested in depicting overt gospel themes. And then there's also a grant that's meant to be kind of a Kickstarter, kind of a bridge builder between, and this is specifically for mothers caring for children who have studied and want to kind of move into a career. So we just got through our awards for this year, but if you go to visionofthearts.org, you can learn more about how to prepare and apply for those next year.
All right, great. Thank you. And we'll turn it back over to Jonathan.
Well, thank you on behalf of the MSH executive and our membership to each of the panelists. I agree with Marianne's comment in the chat. This has been incredibly informative. I've been familiar with Kirk and his work for a long time, but embarrassed to say that the other three artists were new to me. Walter I'd heard of and seen some work in passing. I have a deeper appreciation for what it is that each of you is doing, but also, as you've talked about, your influences have been drawn into some other adventures. So thank you very much for the generous donation of your time and your experience and your perspective tonight. And thank you, Jenny, for moderating and developing questions that have stimulated such rich conversation. Not to put too Trump a point on it, but we had our largest audience so far in the series tonight, which I think speaks to the interest not only in the topic, but in your work. And so again, thank you very much. And hopefully we will see you all on, I believe it's July 22nd for our next in the series. Please look for information on our Facebook page, and that will circulate in the usual ways. Thank you and good night.